The more I have valued how I feel, and then these self-care actions like meditation, taking time to commune just with my soul, unplugging, going to the spa, eating amazing food. The interesting thing is the more I prioritize that, the less time I actually need for myself. It's interesting. It's like a ripple effect. It's like it because I have more space, right? And the more space and bandwidth that I have, the more efficient I am, the more productive I am, the more creative I am, the more everything.
Hey guys, and welcome to the most new episode of Fulfillionaire Live. Today we are tackling the first episode leading up to the self-love 10-day challenge of becoming a Fulfillionaire. And self-love is extremely important. Today, the guest is an absolutely incredible coach, thought leader, spiritual guru. I'm sure he wouldn't classify himself as a guru, but after having done the episode, he's definitely in that realm where you're gonna just fall in love with him through this episode, his ideas, his practices, and the very actionable strategies he gives us to cultivating more self-love and why that may be the most important thing you can do with your time in your life. So welcome, Oren Harris.
Thank you. It's awesome to be here, man.
The first preface is that it is very possible that an hour after this interview, one or both of us could die.
True.
And so sitting in that and grounding in that and saying, this might be one of the last things that you or I get to create to help everybody. And this may be one of the last messages we get to deliver and the wisdoms that you get to let come out on audio, on camera. And so just sitting with that and being like, okay, this needs to change people's lives potentially.
Yeah.
Like really sharing wisdom in a way that you think will live on and help people of future generations. And the second preface is that I do believe we are floating on a rock in space, maybe in a computer simulation. So nothing's really that serious. So if you want to find
I'll
harmony,
let you dance in between the two of those.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So nothing's really that serious.
Right.
But I do want to preface with those couple of things so that you can have an understanding of kind of where we're going to go on this journey.
Yeah. And this question is probably unnecessary, but how deeply do you want me to go down the rabbit hole, right? In terms of where my unique perspective and my wisdom and specifically in this area, it goes deep, right? There's the things that I do in my self-care and my self-love, and things that I do in self-care that promote more self-love and how that impacts my life. And then there's, deeper things that I do that also promote, that are also self-care and self-love, that are beyond the maybe more tangibly obvious things.
Why don't you take me to the bottom? Take me to where self-love for you started. What was the lowest point in your life? Walk me through the story getting to that point, and then walk me through what you've learned since then.
Okay. One of the first big revelations I had, which definitely connects to self-love, is that people-pleasing is like a virus that almost everybody has to some degree, so it almost goes unnoticed. Because it's framed in a positive way, the ego sees people-pleasing as something positive because it's an attempt to connect or get, to connect, right? And to be loving, to be a good person. But what I realized is that it's also a way to completely imprison your soul and your heart and, the depth of who you are from really coming out into the world, right? Because we're doing this conscious or unconscious negotiation or kind of transaction, being a certain way or not being a certain way, doing certain things or not doing certain things, saying things or not saying certain things in order to gain approval or love. So I realized on a very deep level the absolute insanity of that and the imprisonment of that, and felt the deep pain of not fully being myself. That was one of the first places that I realized it. And then I I mapped out that if I were to keep playing this game, it's like a chess game. And I realized it's like a chess game with an infinite number of players, an infinite number of moves, and no matter how many intelligent moves you make, you'll never actually win. Originally, when that came to me, I wasn't thinking in language or terms of self-love, but I realized that I was not loving myself, and I was exchanging my own self-love and self-respect in order to try to gain respect and love from others, to feel respected and to feel loved. And I realized that the more I did that, the further away I felt from feeling respected. I actually felt deep dishonor. I just didn't feel good at all.
So walk me through this in concrete terms. How old were you? Where were you in life? And what was the situation where this started becoming really apparent?
Yeah, it started becoming really apparent when I guess I was about, I don't know, 27, 20, maybe 28 or so. And I'd just stepped into being an entrepreneur. And I feel like this came up. It was catalyzed by being an entrepreneur, and kind of having to be the creator of my own reality, right? And then the power of my voice and putting myself, my work, my art, and my things out there in the world, required me to be free enough and love myself enough to do so, right? And that's really where it came to my attention.
So you were not putting things out there in the world?
No, I was a teacher and a coach. That's the only job that I've had. And then I took a leap of faith and I stepped into being an entrepreneur, and I got into acting, and then I started a business, and then I did that for a period of time, and then I got into like coaching and speaking and mentoring and training. But what I'm saying is that when I left teaching and coaching, and even when I started acting and having my own business, and then that was my first entrepreneurial venture, and then becoming a coach and a speaker, then it became essential that I'm putting myself out there, my voice, my gifts out there in a way that's really going to impact. And so it became more, it just highlighted it more for me, where I was in relation to being fully authentic and feeling great about that. And also feeling kind of imprisoned in my own, there was just a lot more eyes on me, a lot more opportunities to be self-conscious, which then reveals all the places where like I'm people pleasing and altering my behavior or trying to get approval, and that just didn't feel good. It felt horrible.
Do you have any specific examples of that?
I think the most significant example actually was in relationship, even before in business. This was kind of happening at the same time. I was in a relationship and in love with this woman. We were like, had the vision and all the things, and her family didn't know we were together. It was a white woman from Arkansas, and her family wasn't like overtly racist, but they definitely were not approving of interracial. And so we were going to tell them at some point, but then her dad passed away, and she was super close with her dad. So then it was just like created even more tension, which created more tension in our relationship. It's like, man, we really can't tell them now. And then we wound up losing a child, or she got pregnant. And was like, oh my God. So if you can imagine this, it was already a huge thing to tell them that we're even in a relationship. Then it became even bigger when like her dad passed away. She's like, I'm not gonna put that on the family now. And then she gets pregnant on top of that. So it's like, oh, by the way, dad just passed away and I'm dating a black man. Oh, and we're gonna have a baby. And so it was just like that sent our whole relationship into a tailspin. And I had so much desire to mend things and for things to work out in our relationship, and so much inability to do that was the first kind of like explosion of awakening and just feeling like just feeling really bad, but having a strong desire for us to feel good, and then also for me to feel good. So that was probably the first biggest catalyst, that I wasn't thinking so much about self-love at that time, but it was directly connected to self-love. because it was like how I felt about myself and my ability to be a good partner or to fix the relationship and all these different things, and just the experience of deep failure in being able to do so. So I ran out of ideas based upon, everything I had in my toolkit, which then I had a kind of awakening, right? And I had to start counting on something deeper, and really embracing the idea that I can feel good about myself independent of what's going on outside of me or my ability to do this or to do that. And so it started.
Did you discover that in the relationship, or did the
It
relationship
was near the end of the relationship. Yeah, I started discovering it, and I started sort of seeing this kind of witness or observer as like, oh, wow, I'm witnessing like what I'm saying and what's happening in the relationship. And so I was kind of oscillating between like being in it and kind of seeing it and being like, whoa, that's crazy. I'm saying this and that and feeling this, and she's saying that. And like, so then I was going from I, like the I that exists beyond, and then I that's in it. I was oscillating back and forth. So then I was like, oh, it's like revelation. I'll save us, which that doesn't really work, but it really was one of the first catalysts for me really even having this idea of self-love be a thing to be explored, because I wasn't thinking about it before. I would say, generally speaking, I felt pretty good about myself. My life was pretty good, so you could say I love myself to a certain degree, but the deeper levels of what that truly means, and being able to source my sense of value and self-worth, and have that be steady inside me, independent of challenges or life circumstances, that was the first biggest initiation for me into self-love. And then the second wave of that was, like I said, with my business. But that, even me recognizing that in my business, it came as a result of that first big awakening.
Mm. And so tell me, I would love to hear the story about how you managed that breakup with this awareness that started to come through, and the period following that when you really explored these concepts more before the business discovery started to become.
Yeah. How I managed the breakup?
Yeah.
Well,
and also I love this idea that you mentioned where it's there's the you that's above it and seeing what's happening, and maybe the you that lives in here,
yeah,
versus the you that lives in here,
right,
that's trying to be perfect,
right,
and how you either had the cognitive dissonance, the dissonance between the two, or accepted one or the other, and the struggle until I assume now you sit a lot with the heart Oren versus the brain Oren.
Oh, for sure, 100%. Primarily, the navigation of that, I guess, was stimulated by the things that didn't work, the realizations that, what I thought I was seeking wasn't really the depth of what I was seeking. So it was a combination of failure and success. And when I say failure and success, I just mean oh, this isn't actually what I want. Oh, that's why it's not working. And then as I was releasing that, and when I say releasing, I just mean not pursuing it so hard with all of my might, then that started creating space, and I started seeing sparks or trickles of oh, this is what I'm seeking. And then I started experiencing what I was seeking, and then I started experiencing fulfillment and started experiencing a deeper sense of love. And I was like, oh, so then I had the stimulation of both of those.
What? I'm really excited. Give me an example. What was something that you were going towards that just wasn't working, and then you started to be you know what, maybe that's not the thing I should chase, and so you put your energy somewhere else? What were the things? If you had some examples from maybe the business life.
Yeah, well, I give you an example from the relationship, right? Even thinking what I wanted was to fix the relationship, or what I wanted was, oh, I have all these insights, now I'll fix this, then I'll be happy because we fixed the thing that's broken. That will be the win. That will be the fulfillment. And both realizing that one, that didn't work, but then realizing, oh, well, the reason it didn't work is because that's a distortion of what I actually want. What I'm wanting is to feel connected. What I'm wanting is to feel love. And that can be felt independent of fixing anything. And in fact, the very act of trying to fix something inherently has judgment in it. Judgment of our relationship, judgment of her, judgment of me. Not that I was consciously judging it, because I saw it as something positive. So it didn't really occur to me, which is the realization of what I really wanted, was, okay, well, what if I can just accept and love? And I wasn't thinking the word love at the time. What if I can just accept? That's what it was. It was like more of a surrender, but in the surrender came the acceptance. In the acceptance, then I started feeling love, and I'm like, wow, I'm feeling love. And then I saw her innocence and my innocence, and in seeing the innocence, then I was feeling even more love. I was like, oh, wow. And I had compassion. I was like, we're just doing our best. And then when I felt the feeling of we're just doing our best, I'm like, interesting, I'm feeling love and I haven't fixed anything. And I was like, then I felt filled with love. I felt fulfilled. And I was like, that's actually what I want.
That is beautiful.
And then and maybe in the receiving of that, then there is the opportunity to build, to create, not to fix, to learn, to expand. There's a subtlety there that I realized that was profound. It's about not so much about what you're doing, but where you're coming from, right? And so when you're coming from love, then you're not trying to fix something that is broken. You're just creating, because of love. When you're creating from love, it's just like, hey, I love this. We love this. Then now the intelligence in you, the intelligence of love, the creativity to create. Now that might look in a practical sense like, we're making the relationship better. However, it's a vastly different experience when the relationship is becoming more enhanced and better, but just as a pure creation of love, as pure choice, versus this idea, this belief that it's broken, which translates subconsciously to I'm broken. And you can't win that. There's no good answer to the question, what's wrong with me, when you're asking it from the assumption that you're broken. So no matter what you create, when that's in your consciousness, you're not going to be fulfilled. Even if you succeed and you're like, oh, this is broken, I fixed it. You're like, yeah, now I'm fulfilled. And you're like, why do I still feel empty? Why do I not feel fulfilled? I did the thing,
If we're in a situation like this, where in some respect we see like there's something that's not working, I find myself focusing on problems all the time. I find myself trying to fix things in my business, in my relationships, whatever, all the time. What would be some steps that I could take, or what's a question I could ask, or what's something I can do to go more to this love route, if that's where I'm at right now?
Sure, you can ask yourself questions like, what do I really, really want? What am I deeply yearning for? And the question is, the listening is just as important as the question, if not more important. And the quality of listening is to ask the question, but then to listen, to pay attention from a place of complete and unconditional acceptance. Because that's how you can receive insight, rather than the insight getting hijacked by your own judgment of I should be here, or I should be here, I should be doing this, or I should be doing this. Ask questions that point you into what it is that you really want, and more on a fundamental level. That can get you outside of the distortions of the ego, what you think you want, that maybe relatively speaking feels like it's fulfilling you on some level, but it's not. What do I really want? Like in any situation, what am I feeling? And the key to getting the insight out of this question, what am I feeling, which will direct you to your deepest desire that's maybe a little muddied, it's hidden within what you're feeling, is that it's okay to feel anything.
Don't judge the answer.
Right. That's the space. The same way you probably, hopefully not everybody, would be with their child if their child was like frustrated or afraid or sad or something like that. Maybe you want to help your child feel better, but the way you would behold your child And even if you ask, how are you feeling or what's going on, you would ask from a place of, it's okay, whatever you're feeling. You see, and it's that type of space when you ask that question to yourself, to your child, to yourself, it's the space that allows the expression of the feeling to be completely okay. And when you're able to feel the feeling, then you can find clarity of what is it that I'm really wanting right now. Often the clarity is hidden within a feeling that we are resisting through judgment or through fear.
And so let's say that the audience does this exercise and they pull out a journal, they sit with themselves and they ask, what do they really, truly want? And they come up with some answers that are very different than their realities right now. What would your guidance be on moving forward with these answers? Especially some of these things might be very hard to change.
I just had a client over here recently, and we were talking about certain things and things that were very hard to change. And this, I'm answering your question here, and it's one of the reasons something's hard to change, right? Because you could say ingrained habits, patterns of behavior can be hard to change, right? You've programmed them in, right? But one of the things that makes something hard to change is that you're still vested in something that you believe you're getting out of staying the same, and there's still something that you're perceiving of pain in changing. And usually what the something comes down to is just one feeling. It could be shame, it could be embarrassment, and one feeling that you're actually afraid to feel. So I helped her locate, I'm like, but what is the actual feeling, right? Because her thing was, she realized she was going 95% and 100%. She's like, that's illogical. I want to go 100%. I want to go for the 10 out of 10 version of everything that I want in my life. Like, why not? Right? And then she's like, oh, I realized I've been going 95%. And then she realized that, oh, that was safe. And I was like, okay, but what's the nature of the safety? She's like, oh, well, then if I fail, then I could just be like, well, I was only 95%. I told you guys I was only 95%. I was like, yeah, but what are you protecting even in that? Right? And then we just peeled back the layers, and it's like, oh, well, then, then I'd feel embarrassment. It usually comes down to some one feeling, and it might be shame. Right? And so if you can locate what the feeling is that you're not wanting to feel, all fear essentially is a fear of feeling. You could say, oh, I'm afraid of losing my money. No, not really. I'm afraid of losing this. I'm afraid of losing that. I'm afraid of my business failing. It always comes down to a feeling. And this inquiry can help you locate what that actual feeling is, so then you can love it. And when you love it, then all of the unconscious or conscious energy you're using to resist that one feeling, which is not loving yourself or an aspect of yourself, it frees up the energy. It might still be inconvenient, certain circumstances. It might still be uncomfortable. You might be like, it sucks, but you won't be afraid to feel the thing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. So then walk me forward. So you get through this relationship, you have this dawning of acceptance, and you start to recognize like what you actually want out of this relationship and what are you actually getting, and seeing the dissonance between the two.
Yeah.
And then you said this started to enter your business life, and you were coaching, teaching, acting.
I had a company and I was acting. That was phase 2. It's like, so I had a traditional job. I was coaching sports and teaching school. Then I took a leap of faith and got out of that simply because I fast forwarded to the end of my life and imagined myself sitting around with my friends talking about my life and being in regret for the dreams I didn't go after or things that I didn't say or whatever. And so then I took a leap of faith and I got out of teaching and coaching when it was on the rise. So it's not even like I hated it. I actually loved it. It was going great. But something in my spirit was like, I could always go back and do that. I don't want these unanswered questions or these what ifs lurking inside me. So then I left teaching and coaching, and one of the things I was interested in was acting. And so I started pursuing acting. I didn't want to be a starving artist. I'd grown up around entrepreneurs, so I was like, I don't want to wait tables until I break, my big break happens in acting. So that's how I got into being an entrepreneur, and I started a business.
How long did it take for you from the moment you were like, had this conversation in your head about being around the poker table when you're old, and like, am I going to have loved the life I lived? How long did it take you from that moment of realizing maybe staying as a teacher and a coach wasn't going to be the thing you were the most proud of, and that you wanted to at least try? How long did it take to actually execute on that?
It didn't take that long to make the decision, and probably because preceding that was all this relationship trauma and awakening. And what happened in the awakening was I lost my ability. I shouldn't say I lost, that's not completely true. I gave up my ability to act like I didn't know something that I knew. So even if it was uncomfortable to take a step and act on what I know, I let go of my investment in acting like I didn't know. And that was that heightened awareness. And so that helped me along to execute, because I'm like, well, I could act for 6 months or 6 years and avoid this one step that's in front of me right now that I can see very clearly is the way to go, even if I don't know how, even if it's uncomfortable. And so I'm just sharing that piece because that's a key piece to, well, how did he? So it doesn't sound overly simplified, like, oh, I saw it and I was like, I just went and did it. Mm-hmm. No, it was uncomfortable. It was a leap of faith, but I couldn't act like I didn't know that was the move. And so, that empowered me to do it. To answer your question, it didn't take that long for me to execute on it, because I guess I didn't spend the extra time in the illusion of confusion. And that's what happens sometimes just by not even energetically saying yes, right? It wholeheartedly saying yes. Even before I even took a move, one of the things that takes more time to do something is not because there's a lot of unknowns, because we haven't figured it out, because it's hard, because of whatever. It's because we actually are still internally negotiating, and our whole heart and mind are not actually in the decision, even if we say, I'm gonna do it. And so for me, that's something I learned in this awakening. So I was like, well, I know what I can do and what I will do, independent of all of these unknowns or any fear, is like, I'm gonna do it. I'm not gonna, it was the same phenomenon I kept being in my awareness. I'm like, I don't want to 3 years from now circle back to the same moment in time and be like, and then act like I didn't know now, and reveal it to myself again in 3 years and be like, oh yeah, we actually want to do this. And then be like, oh, I wasted 3 years. And so I took that option, away from myself. So that helped me execute it faster.
So you decide, you energetically clear it with yourself, and you're like, I'm doing this. What does that look like? What did you do?
What did I do? I went and talked to the athletic director, which was one of the key people in hiring me for my teaching and coaching position, and I shared my heart with him. I didn't just say, hey, I want to leave. In fact, I shared with him what I was thinking. I shared with him that I was gonna leave, but I also shared with him why, right? Which was really a sharing of my heart. I shared with him that it's scary. I shared with him that it was confusing even, right? I was like, wow, like the kids love me, my sports teams are doing great. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. But I shared the thing with him. I was like, I don't want to get to the end of my life. And I shared that feeling with him as well. So that's what I did. And in doing that, that is a form of, now I would look back and say, self-love. It's an action that is indicative of receiving myself. By being vulnerable and by sharing that is me kind of giving value, or saying this is valuable. And so then what it allowed to come back to me was him then saying, hey, we love you here, and like, I get it, man. Like, blessings, go. So then I got to receive that, but I received that because I was willing to take the action and share, even though I was kind of like, oh, what are they gonna think? And all the kids love me, and I'm all integrated in the community, and we just won a championship, you know what I mean? And so I did that, but again, part of me doing that was, it was so clear to me that was the thing to do. When I tried on these other options of like, oh, I could just quit, or I could just go in there and say I'm leaving, I felt the emptiness again. I felt the regret. And so and I started to become familiar with like, oh, that's not going to feel fulfilling if I just go in and I give him 60% of the story and not 100%. So I literally would try, this is what I did. I tried on these options. I was like, oh, this feels uncomfortable. I just need to go in and resign. And I felt into that. I was like, I didn't feel fulfillment. It felt uncomfortable, but then I imagined going in and telling him my thought process and sharing my heart and also resigning. And that felt more uncomfortable, but I felt fulfillment. I felt that. So I was like, that's the choice. Because if I don't do that and I go in and I resign and I get it out of the way and I move on, then it's going to be lurking. It's going to be haunting me that I didn't have that emotional connection, that I didn't actually share, that I didn't even give the opportunity to get what I really wanted, which was, not from a disempowering place, but I wanted his blessing. I wanted understanding. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be understood. Like, it's not anything about the kids and all this, and like, I don't want to leave you guys hanging, but I could feel, wow, I'm going to regret if I don't actually share. And so it was interesting. It was like, that was uncomfortable. That was uncomfortable. This actually felt more uncomfortable, but it's where the fulfillment was. And so then I acted on it. So that's what I did. And then the next step from there, I started pursuing and researching and looking around, like acting. And I was like, looking at these conferences, and I was pretty intuitive already. So I was like, oh, that feels like BS. And you're like, oh, we'll teach you to become an actor and get you an agent and all this. And so then I started pursuing acting, and then I eventually wound up getting an agent. And then I was like, oh, I gotta make money now. It's not like I saved $500,000 from teaching for 4 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so then I was like, oh man, it got real. I shouldn't say it got real, because I already knew going into it. It was like, I don't have a lot of savings. And so then I was like, I started working. I don't know how much detail you want in terms of exactly what I did, but I ran into a friend of mine from college, and I shared. I just kept sharing. This is what I'm trying to do. I shared my concerns, my fears, my aspirations, and he's like, oh, I have a moving company. If you just want to make some money and have some flexibility to go on your acting auditions, then come and work for me. And I knew it was a temporary thing, so I started doing that.
Would you say that, because now I'm connecting a dot, this is multiple times you've shared this, where by sharing that what you really want with people,
yes,
they will want to help you?
That's exactly what happened. And I didn't read that in a book. It's almost like my higher self, just in the deeper awareness and the deeper authenticity of discovering who I am, I realized that.
It was that 60% of sharing versus 100%
versus 100%, right?
Now, has that shown up in your life consistently since then?
Just the recognition of the 100% versus
by you sharing the 100%, has that shown up for you in positive ways since then?
Oh, yeah, huge.
So can I ask you,
huge,
what's your 100% right now?
In regards to what?
What do you want?
What I feel most alive inside of me when I feel the energy of desire is to make a bigger impact. And when I say bigger, I don't have the hallucination that one version of impact inherently is bigger than another, but it's more of a recognition of the amount of bandwidth and intelligence and wisdom and energy and capacity and giftedness that I have, and wanting that to be even more shared. Like the way I'm sharing it right now feels 100%. Like I feel 100% right now when I'm with my clients, and there's so much more in me, not that I should be doing, but that is wanting to be done and that I'm capable of. I am a space for. I have space available for. So I would say that's the kind of deepest, most primal yearning inside me that is inspiring and sometimes irritating. You know what I mean? But the irritation is just it's coming from it's coming through the self, but it's the recognition of I'm capable of and I'm available for, and at the same time my life is going extraordinary, and I do honor that I'm making a huge impact. And so that how that's translated recently, in a literal sense of, kind of following this process, if you will, is recently a buddy of mine was here and he was going to speak at a big conference, and he'd spent the night, and I was like, oh, have an amazing time and whatnot. And I was like excited for him, and then he left, and I was like, have an amazing time, whatever. And then later that day, maybe about an hour later, I felt a sense of irritation inside me. I was like, that's weird. What would I be irritated about? I was having an amazing day. Everything was going amazing. But when I tuned into it, and this is something that could be put into a process, when I tuned into it without judgment, I was like, when did I start feeling this? Because I see it as information. I see it as something to love. And I was like, oh, it's when he told me he was going to do this big speaking event. I'm like, okay, but that feels amazing. I was like, happy for him. But why would I feel irritated? And then the next thought came in was like, oh, I should be doing that. And I was just being with that. And I was like, okay, that doesn't feel true. That feels like judgment, that I should be. And I was like, oh, what's more true? I was like, oh, I would love to. I want to. I see myself doing that on a bigger scale. And then I looked at that and I was like, okay, but why do I feel irritated though? Because that's still, because I'm not judging myself, so why would I feel irritated? And then I realized that I was saying, just per my vision, that I even said it to you last time you were here. I was like, I want to speak at, the Mind Valley event or whatever. And I was like, I just want to speak more. And I'm like, I'm saying that, but am I really fully expressing to what depth is that transmitting to the people even that I've said it to? And then I realized there was a gap between what I was saying and what I was doing, and more importantly, how embodied that was and how fully I was transmitting that. And I was like, that's why I'm actually irritated. So I was like, no big deal, forgave myself, got in integrity with that. And then that sparked as an action. I reached out to Jason. That's why I saw him recently. I was like, I told Jason I want to speak more now, but I didn't share fully with him. Like, dude, like I'm frustrated and inspired. And like, if you got anything, I'm like, oh, I didn't 100% communicate that to him. So then I hit him up. I was like, it doesn't even matter what the outcome is or if he has any information to help me, because I'm sharing the fullness of my heart and letting him feel why, my why, and to feel that deep yearning, which is what now it's happening here live with you on the camera. I'm like, that's the integrity, and that's what was missing before. So yes, I've continued to do that in my life all the way up until this moment right now, because now I'm just telling you, like, yes. Like, bro, like my spirit is lit, and I feel like I'm catching up.
Lit.
It's lit, yes, on fire, literally. And I feel like I'm, in the most positive way, I'm catching up to what already is, So.
And so for people at
and that, by the way, that to me, that sharing and expression, even of a desire and service, is an act of self-love. Because I have to be valuing this fire, this sharing, this desire. I'm, by virtue of sharing it in that way, I am saying it is of value. And so there's love in it. And so that's what I started learning, these little intricacies of self-love in action. Because self-love can be kind of an ethereal concept outside of the self-care part of it. Is more tangible. It's like, okay, I'm doing these things, but these little subtleties became my more advanced Jedi level of self-love. I'm like, oh. And that's why it feels fulfilling, just sharing my heart, or even asking, regardless of what comes from it.
What would be something that we could do if we wanted to go through our lives? And when you start asking yourself, like, after hearing this story, I'm so inspired to say, like, okay, what are all the things that I'm not sharing in every category of my life?
Yeah.
How can I get a hold of that and make it manageable and sustainable and keep it in a place of, like, I'm inspired to voice these things in every area and not overwhelmed? What can I do?
Not get overwhelmed by the thought of sharing it?
Well, and like there might be 20 things, right? So I wonder.
Yeah, sure. That's a great question. Anytime we get overwhelmed, we know that the mind has come in and is taking things too literally, right? If I took this literally and I was like, oh, I've been speaking for a while. It's not like I'm not speaking, but like I'm looking at my next level. If I took it literally, then it would be like, then I'd be like, oh, there's all these unknowns. I don't want to overwhelm myself or anybody else with, I don't know where to start. Blah, blah, blah. That's the mind getting too involved. And so what you can do is just zoom back to really at a baseline level. It's the receiving and the choosing to do the thing, to speak more, to impact more, right? And so if I get overwhelmed, I know that it's basically the mind taking all of the unknowns, all of the unforeseen steps, all of the details, and all the energy of it, and it's being processed through the mind, which then makes the mind and the body feel overwhelmed. So it's just like, get back to the essential, back to the essence. That's how I don't get overwhelmed, and that's how I coach my clients. I'm like, I'll say things like, okay, yeah, you want to start a YouTube channel and make it go global or whatever, and you've got all these ideas, and go do your first Facebook Live. That's not a little action, because it's representative of you expressing this energy now. Don't underestimate the impact and the momentum in you just doing this one thing. Don't look at the big idea as if once I accomplish all of these things, then I'll be who I want to be. It accelerates the moment you choose to be it and then to share it. So I saw that, and this is how to answer your question, how I didn't get overwhelmed. I saw that action that I took, even sitting down with Jason, not as a little thing, because I wasn't measuring the outcome. I was measuring the authenticity of my expression, and I just understand energy, and I'm like, so the world is hearing me that, like, yo, I'm ready for this next level now. That's how I don't get overwhelmed. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
And one of the things another action that you can take is, if you take your closest friends, your inner circle, your mastermind, anybody who's close, let's just say it's 20 people you have that you would consider your inner circle, and ask yourself a question. And I'll ask you this question, and whoever else is listening, be honest with yourself. Take your biggest dreams and aspirations, your deepest yearnings, and ask yourself the question, can you honestly say that these 20 people in your inner circle could tell you, without you saying anything, they could tell you what your deepest aspirations are, your grandest visions are? And not just that, because you might have told them, if they can't tell you why, then you have not fully shared. Even if because you can share verbally, like, oh, I have this vision, right? You could share the vision. You could bring more spirit into it if you're like, and I'm inspired by it. So now you've got the physical and you've got the spiritual, right? Spiritual just meaning like you're sharing your enthusiasm. It's not like, oh, I want to do this thing, and you're like, and they can't feel you. So there's the physical, that's the level of precision and clarity about, this is what I'm creating, right? Then there's the spiritual. This is great, it's just coming to me in this moment. Then there's the spiritual, and that's the energy of inspiration or enthusiasm or excitement, where people can feel the spirit of the vision. So they've got those two checked off, but that's not the whole thing. The other one is the magnetism. That comes from the feeling, and that comes from the heart, and that comes from, but why? Like, why do you want to impact more people? If I just said, hey, I want to reach millions of people, right, for example, but I wasn't connected to my heart or sharing my heart, like, why? Then, yeah, you'd have information and you'd be equipped to give to me, but you wouldn't be 100% equipped. You're only going to be as equipped as I'm offering you this full transparency of my whole self. And so the exercise, to just loop back to that, is just ask yourself, if you listed 5 things that were big dreams of yours, and just go through, in terms of the clarity, which would be the most obvious level, like, do they know your grandest aspirations and visions? Can they feel your enthusiasm in that? And can they tell you why? And I'll add one more category. So that's 1, 2, 3. Do they know your deepest fears? You see, because if somebody knows your visions and they have the clarity of that and it connects in their brain, and they can also feel the spirit of it, it connects there, and they can also feel the heart of it, and they can also feel your fears or considerations, then that person is equipped, at least through their channel of whatever synchronistically connected to them giving to you, is now 100% equipped to flow whatever's coming through them to you. And that process itself is a mirror of how much you love yourself. And how much you love yourself, which would include how much you love your own visions and desires. So that's a fantastic process. And what will happen for a lot of people, including me, is you might see that, wow, okay, Skip, for example, I spent time with Skip and all these people I'm close to, and and I know their greatest aspirations, their deepest fears. I'm intuitively connected. I get downloads for them. I feel capable of giving to them. Do they have the equal capacity to give to you? Or do you know what I'm saying? Like,
So I have a question for you that actually, like, we must be like synced up right now.
Yes.
Because this next question is lined up with exactly what you just said, which is, okay, so I feel like this has just been so much incredible wisdom of how do we build our self-love? And if we're not currently there might be some serious effort to get there, and there might be some serious changes that have to undergo so that we can really be living in a state of self-love where we really approve of everything that we're saying and doing and feeling. Yeah. What if we are on this journey and family members, loved ones, significant others, kids, grandparents are around us who are not on board with their own self-love? And how can we either help, or should we help, or what does that look like?
Yeah, that's a great question, because that's probably one of the number one things that slows us down or stops us from moving forward, is the connection and love we have with others, and the threat of feeling like we could lose the connection and love we have with others, right? And so I would say that on a practical level, maybe practical is not the word, be intuitive and discerning about what you're sharing and with whom. But I'm saying that with such a delicacy, because in order to even be intuitive and discerning about what it is that you're sharing, you kind of have to do this other thing, right? Which is love yourself enough to speak your truth, to be your truth, to speak your heart, regardless of what the outcome is going to be. It doesn't even matter if it's hard or uncomfortable. The very act of doing it is showing that you're willing to be that, right? And it's hard, especially if you have a lot of tension around you or a lot of fear in doing that. It's hard to do the second thing, which would be, oh, let me just feel into it and be discerning. Maybe I should not share this particular thing, right? That's wisdom. But wisdom is hard to get to without love. And love is the more wild side, meaning like, it's like, all right, my intentions are pure. I'm clear about, my intentions are pure, and I'm willing to share my heart deeper, to get into that place of integrity of like, it could just be down to one conversation. Like I have a client of mine who's a coach and an entrepreneur, and for him, it's just come down to one conversation with his mom. But the key in that one conversation is for him to leave it all on the court. In probably what feels incredibly vulnerable, and like maybe opening himself to being hurt or to whatever daggers might come flowing his way. But the real success in that, which is incredible self-love in action, is, and he's at this place now, it's not about how she responds. It's independent of whatever judgment or whatever be coming your way. Can you with the intention of just liberating yourself and being connected to yourself and loving yourself, and of course giving the other person a real opportunity to meet you in that, will you just do it? You see, it's hard to tell even if we're giving a person a real opportunity until we know we've actually gone 100%. And so for me, that's how I've navigated that. And, I have compassion for myself, and I'm like, I may not I may just like dust myself off, be like, but I know what the feeling of integrity feels like on a heart level of integrity. It's like, you know what? I gave this person every opportunity to see me and to understand who I am and to give them an invitation to meet me in that. Then if you like start choosing like, oh, maybe I'll walk away, or maybe, taper down the relationship, or kind of, then you'll feel better about doing that. But what happens is if people avoid this part and then they try to just adjust it on this level, which is I'm going to cut that person out of my life, or we won't talk that much, then something feels incomplete inside them. They won't still feel fulfilled. And that might be because subconsciously they know they didn't actually give the 100%. And it literally, I'm just to simplify it could literally, from an energetic standpoint, boil down to one conversation. Like, have you actually shared without trying to defend, without people pleasing, without being like, oh, I know them and they're going to do this thing, and just like, this is who I am. Then you could walk away if you want.
There are a lot of possibilities and people in our lives that we do this with. What would you recommend? Because this conversation, especially with like a mother, a father, a significant other, this can get heavy, and it might take some time too to really lay this all out. How would you recommend we go about like setting up times for this conversation, or an environment for this conversation, so that it can really happen in a beautiful way?
Yeah, just being clear about your intention is a very simple but powerful start. Just be clear about your intention. And if I'm working with someone on this, and I help them get clear on their intention by seeing what it is and by seeing what it isn't. Because remember, there's always like there's the clarity and the purity of your intention, and then there's the distorted version of your intention, which is usually some form of like, well, I don't want them to think this. Like if you're already thinking I don't want, then that's not what you want, obviously. Because that's keeping you in protection, which is keeping you not fully sharing yourself, which kind of keeps you in the cycle. So being clear about your intention, the purest form of the intention, not the secondary offsprings of your intention. Like, for example, I said earlier, like your intention is to liberate yourself, right? To love yourself. And then maybe another... what you're open to is you're opening an invitation for someone to meet you. But the intention is not so that they meet you. That's not the actual agenda. I'm going to say this so that I get this. You want to go in and set yourself up for success independent of the result. And that's a matter of tuning in clearly to what your intention is. So once you're feeling the clarity of your intention, right, and understanding it, then when you communicate it, which is another step, you're going to be more energetically clear about what your actual intention is, right? And that's how you set the space. So that's there's the physical space, like, hey, let's get together over coffee for an hour and let's talk about these three things. There's the physical space, but what I'm saying is step one, get clear about the energetic space. So then when you go to set up the physical space that is conducive to what it is that you're intending to do, you'll be able to articulate that in a way that's clear instead of leaving open, just for it to be wobbly. And then the physical space might just be like being clear about, hey, Skip, I want to talk with you, and here's my intention, and here's why. See, it's repeating that process of like, because if a person knows why, then it doesn't matter their opinion about it. At least you've given them the clarity of like, here's why. So it minimizes, I'm not saying it eliminates, it minimizes the potential of going down rabbit holes that are unnecessary. And then the person has the opportunity, because they're seeing you clearly, oh, this is what you want, this is your intention, this is why. Then if they opt into it, they're opting into it from a more clear space, which is almost demanding some clarity from them because they're meeting you in that intention. So I appreciate the question because like we can break this down like to a science. And the other thing I would throw into that is just realize that if, regardless of the result and regardless of how big it is or how many times you're doing this, just receive it as, wow, this is what self-love feels like. You see, because there's the prize right there. There's the ultimate prize. It's not only what self-love feels like. If you show up in anyone's reality like that and you're actually in that space within yourself, then even if it's uncomfortable, you're able to see them in that. So it's actually the greatest gift of love to them. Right?
Absolutely. It's that trust.
Right, exactly.
It's them feeling that you trust them. Like you sharing with me, which I'm sure is going to happen today now, like what you really envision for your future will not only give me the gift of being able to help you with that, but also you getting the gift of sharing that completely. And then now we are better friends. Like I remember Jason Goldberg was the first person that I probably opened up to in my life. Like in this level that we're discussing right now, where I was always executing on my dreams. I always had big dreams and I was doing those things. I didn't have anyone to share it with. I didn't share any of the fears that I had with anyone. I just did the things and people were always amazed.
Right.
And then one time I just called up Jason and I was like, I don't feel like anyone really knows like what I'm going after or understands like how hard this has all actually been. And then we just sat down and he was like, after that conversation, he's like, that's when we became real friends.
Right.
And that was just last year.
Right. And that's a perfect example of like the thing you really want that's actually going to fulfill you is just on the other side of what you may think you want, you know? Because it's like, the thought of doing that to the self might feel like it's uncomfortable, and that's what it can make it seem like that's not what you want. But then you do it and then you realize, oh, that's actually what I want. Maybe the route to getting there was just releasing the resistance to the uncomfortability, but hidden inside that is the true desire. And that's, I've done that so many times over and over that it doesn't usually even require a process. I'm just clear about what it is that I really want. And I'm willing to dive into that. So the dive into it part would be the uncomfortability or the feeling that's like, oh, anything. I don't want to feel that one feeling. I've done that so many times that clarity has maintained itself as more of a natural state. The clarity of like, oh, this is what's true. This is what I want. And my willingness to share that transparently with myself and with others, over time just clears that channel to where that's why my channel's pretty consistently clear,
Okay, so you just brought up something super important and valuable, and I have 2 questions left for you.
Okay.
This question is, you said that your channel is open because you've got that sense of clarity. What are the habits? So I have this whole thing where I don't believe in advice because no one really understands each other, but we can empathize with each other. What would you say the habits are to keep that channel of clarity, of feeling what you really want, open? Like, what are the habits we can practice outside of what we've already discussed?
Sure. Yeah, I like to give habits, and I like to also give the thing that makes the habit easier to execute on, right? And so one habit is just simply speaking your truth, your heart's truth, right? And I'll say a little bit more about that. The thing for me that allowed me to gain a momentum on executing on that habit was falling in love with truth. And the thing that helped me to fall in love with truth was the deep pain and the deep pain of not being in truth, and the high inspiration of being in truth helped me fall in love with truth, which is the same thing I was saying earlier. I got to a point where I'm not interested in hiding something from myself. So I would rather be in the burning fire of truth, which truth in a positive way, both love and truth burn. They just burn whatever's obsolete, not real, not in alignment, not essential, so it's a negative, positive thing. I got to the point where I understood that experientially so much that I'm like, truth, I'm not interested in hiding to you. So hiding from you. So I felt I'm a lover of truth. I love truth, but the frequency or the truth is in perfect, it's a perfect grounds for clarity, because the truth burns away confusion, illusions, and that which is not real. So if you love truth, and then the practice of loving truth would be the speaking of your truth, even if your voice shakes, then truth is always going to be nearby. It's like beaming, you know what I mean? So it's like my awareness is so heightened and I'm so magnetized towards it. I'm like, burn me, because the only thing it ever burns is some layer of ourselves, some protective layer, some false layer, something, some illusion. And so, yeah, fall in love with truth, speak the truth is the direct action, and speaking your truth, your heart's truth. And I gave several examples of that, or a couple, is a direct action of someone who loves themselves, right? Because if you love yourself, then your heart's truth about anything, your desires, your fears, your needs, whatever is your truth, the very fact of speaking it is loving yourself. And so, like I said before, self-love can be an ethereal concept, but in terms of, things that can accelerate that, if you're just willing to have the courage enough to do them, speaking your truth is one of them. And like, it's kind of like public speaking, it gets easier and easier. And it gets easier and easier because there's less and less resistance to it. So if you have a lot of resistance backed up, it might feel like this overwhelming thing where you're going to experience all this pain, but that's just a feeling though.
And to be clear, something I would separate, and we'll have time to go into eventually, which we can do a whole separate episode on this, is the shadow side of speaking your truth.
Right, that's why I said your heart's truth.
Yeah, so the loving truth, and like explaining the why of your truth.
Yeah, it's like when you're speaking your heart's truth, then it's infused with compassion and wisdom. Right?
Beautiful. So speaking our truth and doing that consistently, that will help us amplify self-love.
That'll help you amplify self-love 100%. Self-love, self-respect, which is a flavor of self-love, self-honor, self-trust. To the degree that we're speaking our truth and being authentic, that's to the degree that we'll trust ourselves. And to the degree we trust ourselves, that's where we get a momentum on executing on what we want. Because we are in integrity with ourselves. That's part of the feeling of fulfillment. So yeah, speaking your truth is one of those things. And being vulnerable, I think that adding vulnerability into the act of speaking your truth is what purifies your truth. And it's not the truth as beating someone over the head, trying to change somebody. Like I said, back in my relationship, initially I was discerning some truth, but then it kind of got hijacked by the self, and it was like, oh, you need to hear this, which then it was coming across as judgment. And that's why when truth, it could be fierce, like the fierce penetrating fire of truth, but if it's infused with compassion, wisdom, and love, it won't feel that way. When it feels dirty or gritty or grabby, it's because the truth that's in the heart, and you literally might be actually intuiting, the truth, it's been hijacked by the ego structure, which has its own agenda. It's in protection. And so if you're in protection and you have a truth, but you also have this layer of protection, then when you speak that truth, even if it's true, then it's going to feel icky to whoever you're speaking it to, because this little thing has an agenda. It wants something. Validation, protection, and that's when truth, the fire of truth burns in a sense, in a more negative way, like, ouch, that burned. Otherwise, the uncomfortability that just comes from being in vulnerability, that burning is the burning that you want.
Okay, so speaking our heart's truth is number one. Are there other things that we can do on a regular basis?
Yes, 100%. So realizing that everything that the experience we're having of our life and our reality comes down to how we feel. Most people know that, right? The quality of our life, the visceral, actual experience of when we talk about how much we love our life, it all comes down to how we feel. And so prioritizing feeling is something that you can now strategically prioritize and put into your schedule. So that's like meditation, self-care practice, going deeper into that. For me, prioritizing joy is a new one in the last couple of years, right? Prioritizing presence. I heard a quote years ago. I think it was like, if I had an hour to chop down a tree, I'd spend 45 minutes sharpening my axe. And I like this quote, especially for entrepreneurs, because, chopping trees is metaphoric to like giving your gift in the world and running your business, right? It's like, I got all these things to do. I realized the link between my self-care and my productivity, right? And what helped me realize that initially is that, I love inspiration, for example. I love to feel inspired, and it helps me to be a high-level creator. It helps me to do my work in the world. It helps me. And the truth is, I love being inspired because I love being me. I love being tuned into spirit. That is fulfilling to me. Does that make sense? And so inspiration is something that I will prioritize, right? And I've linked it to all the other areas of my life. I've linked, this is what I've done. I've linked these things all the way around so that to execute on the or the prioritization or the ritual or whatever, I have all of these connection points of value. So I prioritize things like inspiration and joy. So then I can reverse engineer that and be like, okay, well, if inspiration and joy feels good and I value and love myself, and it also helps me in my business and my relationships with all these different things. Like, I got all these value points connected. So then I'm like, I'm going to prioritize it. So then I can be like, well, what can I do to cultivate these things? So now I don't just have the doing like, oh, I'm going to meditate, which is amazing. Meditation, I'll list some of those things here in a second. But now I'm not just doing the thing. I'm not having to expend as much willpower or effort to try to get myself to do, because often when we're having to expend more discipline or effort to do it, and we're at discipline and we're not quite at commitment or devotion, is where it becomes more effortless, is because we have not linked it experientially linked it in our values. And so there's still separation. It's like, I don't know if I have the time to meditate because I'm trying to be productive, and I've got a 10-hour day, but if you start prioritizing these things, not just because they're going to help you be more productive, but because you value feeling, because hello, that's everything. Like, how you feel is the quality of your life. If you value feeling good, then I've prioritized that essentially above everything. Which, interestingly enough, the more I have valued how I feel, and then these self-care actions like meditation, taking time to commune just with my soul, unplugging, going to the spa, eating amazing food. The interesting thing is, the more I prioritize that, the less time I actually need for myself. It's interesting. It's like a ripple effect. It's like because I have more space, right? And the more space and bandwidth that I have, the more efficient I am, the more productive I am, the more creative I am, the more everything. So I'm like, well, what are the things? So I'm answering your question from two ends: the literal things to do, which I can slow down on that, and how do I actually get myself to do them and move from discipline to commitment to devotion? Because discipline is like, okay, there's an inertia there still. It's like, I know these things. I know when I meditate, I know when I eat good food, and it feels good and it helps me, but there's still this separation happening. But I still perceive I'm going to lose time over here. I'm losing something over here. So I'm going to have to discipline myself to do it and to create the habit. But then eventually it's just like that turns into commitment. It's like, oh, I'm just doing it, And then eventually, which is where I would say I'm at, is with self-care, is devotion. So it's not even something I have to effort to discipline on myself. If I realize that, my bandwidth, my tank is now depleted and it's siphoning energy, I'm like, stop the presses. There's no negotiation there. And whatever that looks like, whether it looks like taking an hour, taking a vacation, my self-care game is I'm devoted to it. And I really want to emphasize that. I'm doing it, but I'm not just doing it, I'm devoted to it, which means I've given my free will to it. I'm like, it's happening. It is an utmost priority for all of the reasons, right? And so it's become a habit. Because at the end of the day, what's going to get us to do the thing, that's the emotion. It's the energy in motion. What's going to get us into action? I love to help people awaken or free the trapped energy that results in it just being more effortless to do the thing. You know, I love doing that just as much as like just do it, and then you'll create the space. You'll defeat the inertia, and then you'll just be in the habit of doing it. I like playing in that realm, but it's a smaller percentage. I like to like unlock, explode, and it's like whew, then you can't stop yourself from doing it, you know, and then link it in your brain and in your body and your, you know, to where it's like, ooh, yeah, this is fun. The most recent one that I've done is when it comes to like organizational structures and a stronger foundation, like in my business, like all like root chakra stuff. I mean, I'm doing very well with it, but another layer of that was brought to my attention, and an opportunity to ground in even deeper my foundation, and that's things like organization or accounting or with my taxes or just like health, just the little things that I haven't been that inspired to do and that took a level of discipline for me to do. I really, per this, me being able to give more in the world and to be more in the world and to feel even better in my home, right? I made the connection, which amplified the desire that, wow, I really need to step up my game in this area. And what helped me do that, though, to execute it, like I could just start doing it. I was like, okay, I did just start doing it, but it was still taking discipline. But what I needed to do was connect my heart more and my spirit more to get my spirit and my heart fully online with it. So it's not just something I'm doing. And
so would you say what you're explaining is how you had that 100% conversation with yourself?
Yeah. Yes, exactly. It's just like, and it helps in having that conversation to not get lost in judgment. Because as soon as you say I should, then you're not in the depth of the conversation. It's like, it's okay. Just be truthful with me. And I was like, and then I realized, I was like, oh, when it comes to speaking and coaching and, you know, working out and all these other areas of my life, I could feel my full action in it, my full spirit in it, and my full heart. And then when I looked at this area, and I also connected like, wow, this is really going to be important for me if I want to give more to the world and feel even better in my home, in my structure, and not feeling any kind of tension or stress, and have all of my affairs, you know, in impeccable order, just as impeccable as these. I'm like, ooh, I want that. So I was like, I saw the value in that, and then I felt the love in it. I was like, oh, I'd love that. Oh, that's part of my own self-love, is giving that to myself. So then it's like, whew, then my heart came online, which then opened up my spirit. And then I was like, now I'm inspired to do this. You see? And that's what moves it out of discipline of like, cutting through the inertia. Oh, let me get myself to whatever, call the DMV and like research this thing or whatever. And here's another thing I found in that was a part of my process. I was like, yeah, but I know I don't have to do anything. Meaning that's not the truth. Like I could delegate it, but then I realized even getting someone to do it for me, or attracting or manifesting or delegating it, because I started doing that in certain areas, I'm like, it doesn't have all of me in it because I have not fully loved it. And so my presence and my love is not fully in it. So it was a kind of resistance. So it was a separation. So if we then try to get someone to do something, because I was just wrestling with it. I'm talking to myself. I was like, yeah, but it's not like I have to do all these things personally. People could help me. But I was like, oh, but even for them, to me, to manifest people helping me, my heart still has to be open and clear in transmitting what I need help on. And so if I'm resisting hiding any part of that from myself, then how am I going to even get someone to even help me with that? So that's when I realized that, oh, my heart is not fully on board with this, and therefore my spirit's not, and that's why I'm not enthused. And so, but I did start with the basics, which is just like, oh, I found 10 foundational things. I'm like, let me tighten these things up, and just on the action of doing them. And I started creating a little momentum, but I was like, oh, this is what it feels like to operate on a level of discipline, like, or to overcome procrastination. And I was like, okay, I'd rather explode and obliterate procrastination. I'm like, how do I do that? Get my heart on board, get my spirit on board, and my body, and have them all on the same team. And I'm like, now I feel unstoppable. I'm like, that's how I want to feel in expanding my foundation, because I'm like, that's how I feel here, 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 and here. So why would I not feel that way over here? And I realized I hadn't given myself the full opportunity to do that, or even to elicit the support, whether the support is knowledge or something. That's why when my girl asked me earlier about my self-love, one of you guys asked me, this for me is a manifestation of my own self-love, because I'm like, I've done podcasts and shoots and stuff like that, but this feels so good to me, and I'm radiating it clearly. I'm like, I love the fact that, the sound, everything's being taken care of for me. So I'm having that experience. Yes, I'm on your podcast, but this is still a manifestation in my world of something that I'm like, oh, that would feel so good to me. Right?
Beautiful. So let me ask you the last question, because you have just thrown down like fire, literal fire this whole time. If and when people fall in love with you who see this, how can they support you? Where can they go? How do they find you? How do they work with you? How do they support?
I'm very active on Instagram at Oren Harris, and I post content on there daily. Written content, my Instagram live, my Instagram TV. I've got my O Show episodes, and that really is kind of more inside look into how I'm experiencing, what I'm exploring, and that's really juicy. My website is Oren Harris, which is ORENHARRIS, OrenHarris.com. I'm Oren Harris on Facebook. Those are the main platforms. And one of the things in terms of like, in addition to the free content that I have, my O Academy, I just started that. I put my heart and soul into that. I've got exclusive content and really amazing support for people that are joining me in that. And I really love that, because it's a way to receive a ton of value, but because of the model of it, I can have it at a very low price point. So that feels really good. And that can even be found on my website, but that's the O Academy. And I'm a coach. I'm a coach to leaders and high performers and visionaries and genuine artists and people that are genuinely devoted to having the highest impact, living their highest potential as their authentic self, which really is where kind of self-realization or awakening meets and unites with self-actualization and living one's highest potential. And so I do have a couple of client spots open. I'm starting, I've got a mastermind called The Circle, and then the newest, biggest thing that I've created is a mastery apprenticeship. And that's a year-long program for somebody who's resonating with me on all of the levels, who wants to like really dive in with me on the most intimate and most advanced, for lack of a better word, level.
Amazing.
Yeah, man.
That's awesome. We'll talk about that.
Yes.
Well, thank you for coming today. I'm so stoked for people to see this, and like, I couldn't have imagined a better person to represent just self-love and self-care and to teach all these different things and share your stories. So thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, man. It's been an absolute pleasure. And I'm honored that you invited me. And it made me smile that you invited me specifically on this topic, because it's like, I was like, how did you know? I don't even know how much knowledge I have to share in this until we really sit down. But I was like, oh, that's very perceptive of you to invite me on that, in this particular category. So I was like, that made me smile. And I was like, oh yeah, my self-care game is like A++. It's so A+ that I don't even consider it a self-care game. It's just like, it's at that non-negotiable status. That's why I always have so much space available, is because, and I don't have to be militant or diligent about it, because I've had so much devotion in it and prioritize it by virtue of action, not saying I'm going to prioritize it. It's created so much space. And as I said, ironically, it's also why I can give so much for so long and have so much bandwidth and go for so long without running out. I was like, it's kind of a paradox there. It's like the more I've done that, the more efficient I've become, the less I actually even have to focus on myself. But that's because I prioritize it though. So I say that also to, those people out there like myself that are heart-centered and are givers and are like, man, I really need to give. I really need to fulfill my mission. I don't have the time or I don't need to be focusing on myself. That if you could see like the ability to receive massively enhances your capacity to give. And it's like, it's actually selfish. It seems selfless, like, oh, let me forget about myself and let me just serve the world. I'll be selfless. It's actually selfish if we resist self-care and self-love and people giving to us. It's selfish because it's coming from the self going, oh, no, not me. There's this, can I riff on this for a second?
Yeah.
There's this version of selfish, which is the obvious, arrogant, look at me, I'm important, I'm more important, right? That's putting yourself on a pedestal. The more covert, hidden shadow side of it is, don't look at me. Oh, I'm just a giver. It's not about me. Like, I'm just here to give to the people. Hey, it's not about me. Who's saying it's not about me? Anything that you're negating and blocking off the channel of the flow of abundance and the flow of love, just being able to flow, which means it has to fully include you, is actually not selfless. It's selfish. Because you have to, it's the self, it's the ego going, not me. It's not spirit going, not me. Because in the flow of love, which is the flow of abundance, there's no restriction. There's no withholding on giving, nor there's no blocking of receiving. That's actually selfless. And that's a whole other rabbit hole of like, what I found is the deeper you go into self-love and loving all aspects of the self, meaning like the personality structure, the emotion, everything, the more the self actually disappears and there's only love. All right.
So
if I can drop a bomb right there,
it's so good.
So good. Oh, and then there's this.
Yeah,
but yeah,
that's a whole separate segment to itself.
Yeah. Self-love at its core is just love, and that's a revelation that we have.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So I'm hoping that by peer pressuring Oren while the cameras are still rolling to record a meditation today, like, would you guys be interested in like a 10 or 15 minute guided walkthrough with Oren explaining maybe how to cultivate some self-care and some self-love that you can do on a regular basis? Would you be interested in doing that?
Sure. Yeah, let's do it.
Let's go.
I'm game.